I'm Sarah Campbell, 24 years old, living in a worn-down neighborhood on the outskirts of Milwaukee, where winter can freeze even the toughest patience. 6 days a week my mornings begin at 4:45. Bundling up in a thick coat and walking 3 blocks to Brewhaven, a tiny coffee shop where I brew espresso for people, even earlier than me, catching their train downtown. Every afternoon, I get home just long enough to change uniforms, shove a protein bar into my pocket, then jump into my 2006 Toyota Corolla. The only asset I've managed to own after nearly 3 years of non-stop work, to deliver pizzas for Rico's. I once joked with Zoe, my only real friend at Brewhaven, that if I wasn't careful, I'd be mistaken as a full-time employee of poverty. She laughed so hard she cried, but truthfully, there was nothing funny about it. My hands were constantly cracked from cleaning chemicals. My back ached from hours hunched over. But I kept going. Because I had no other choice. Meanwhile, my twin brother, Mason, lived just a few blocks from my parents, in an apartment with an elevator, central heating, and not a care in the world about due dates. All of it paid for by our parents. Mason and I are the same age, twins, but judging by how our parents treat us, you'd think he was their only child. I've never seen him hold down a real job. He says he's developing a tech project. A project that's been in development for over 3 years, burned through more than $60,000 of our parents' money, and still has nothing to show. And me. I paid my own way through community college. Every semester I had to choose between textbooks and health insurance. I used to think maybe they just didn't realize that maybe my parents loved us in different ways. But I was wrong. So wrong. Just last month, while delivering in a freezing rainstorm, my car broke down in the middle of an intersection. I called my dad, not to borrow money, just to ask for a ride. He answered casually, "Mason's in a Zoom meeting. I can't just walk out to help you." I remember standing there, rain soaking down my back, listening to the dial tone and wondering what hurt more. The cold, or being abandoned again. My parents always said I was strong, independent. Didn't need support like Mason. They don't understand that being strong doesn't mean you don't need love. It doesn't mean you don't need someone to ask, "Are you okay?" I remember once my mom asked why I didn't come to family dinners anymore. I said it's because I work night shifts. She sighed, like it was my choice, not the only way I could survive. They never ask if I need anything. But they always keep me updated on Mason's startup progress. A startup with no license, no clients, no product. I used to believe that if I worked hard enough, I'd finally earn their respect. But after 6 relentless years, what did I get? A suggestion that I lend Mason $500, so he can pitch to an investor next week. I laughed so hard my throat hurt. I didn't have $500. I didn't have 50. I couldn't even afford a sick day without risking next month's rent. But I still had to drive around delivering food to people who tipped $2 and complained the pizza was cold. And I still had to smile. Because I knew, if I stopped, even for 1 second, I would collapse, like a busted robot short-circuiting in the rain. Because here, no one was coming to save me. No one was waiting with open arms. There were no parents laying out a red carpet. There was only me. And every dollar I had to earn with my body, my time, and my dignity. Just to keep going. When I was little, I truly believed our parents loved us both equally. That belief began to crack on our 8th birthday. I spent 3 weeks drawing a large card for Mason, me, and him in front of our house, hugging, with the sun shining behind us. I taped it to the fridge, thinking it would touch him. Mason frowned and muttered, "Why do I look fat?" Mom laughed, then quietly took the drawing down the next day. In its place, a photo of Mason appeared, wearing his baseball uniform, bat in hand, looking like a star athlete. I asked where my drawing went. Mom said, "You probably don't want something like that hanging on the fridge forever, right?" That's when I began to understand. In our house, Mason got the pictures. I was the shadow standing outside the frame. When I was 10, Dad enrolled Mason in electronic drum classes at a music center, 3 sessions a week. Meanwhile, I asked to join a public library's evening art class and got a flat-out no. Art has no future. Focus on real subjects, they said. A year later, Mason quit the drums because he was tired. I still snuck into the library every Monday, sitting in the back, teaching myself from worn-out books. Every vacation Mason went skiing in Colorado or on luxury camps in Vermont. I stayed home, watching the neighbor's asthmatic cat and building responsibility. Dad's go-to phrase whenever I asked was, "Girls are stronger. You don't need as much as Mason." I believed it. So much that I stopped asking. 16 was my first real wake-up call. Mason got a used Ford Focus, leather seats, smooth, A/C, working radio. I asked, "Can I learn to drive on the same car as Mason?" Mom gently replied, "That's not really convenient, honey. The car is under Mason's name." 3 months later, on my birthday, Dad walked me to the bus stop. He smiled and said, "I got you a 3-month bus pass. You'll learn how real life works." And I did. I learned to push through snow at 6 in the morning to get to school on time. I learned to avoid the pitiful looks from classmates when I showed up late because the number 22 was stuck in traffic. I learned to stop asking why, because there was never a fair answer. At 17, I began freelancing logo designs for small local shops using a free classifieds website. I borrowed a beat-up laptop from the library to sketch on freeware, emailed the files, and earned $40 a pop. Money I saved penny by penny. Meanwhile, Mason started a podcast about inspirational living, despite never having held a job. My parents proudly told the neighbors, "He's a natural-born leader." I earned a partial scholarship to a design school in Seattle. Mom cried, hugging me tightly. For one of the very few times in my life. But 2 weeks later, she called me down to the living room, her face tense. "Sarah? Your father and I need to talk." I remembered the rattling hum of the AC overhead, as Dad said, "We used your college fund to help Mason launch his startup, just temporarily. His project has real potential." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just asked, "And if I can't attend school anymore, then what?" Mom took my hand. "You can apply for loans, can't you? You've always been strong. You'll figure it out." I said nothing. I went upstairs, opened the window, and looked out over the pitch-black street, dim yellow lights falling on bare winter trees. That night, for the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't really part of the family. Just a long-term renter in a house I never got to choose. 3 months later, I enrolled in community college. Morning shifts as a barista, kitchen help at night, design classes sandwiched in between. I didn't quit, but from that point on, I slowly let go of the fantasy that I'd ever be treated fairly. My parents called me the responsible one. But they never realized the price of that responsibility. Was a childhood spent growing up alone? In a family that gave all their light to the child they chose to love? I used to think, if I just tried a little harder, maybe my parents would finally see me. That one day they'd realize I was the one holding everything together. I was wrong. For the past 2 years, Mom's calls started coming at hours no one should be calling, like 10 p.m. on a Tuesday, or 7 a.m. on a Sunday. I learned to guess the ask just by her sigh. "Sarah, can you send $800 just until the end of the month? Your dad's working on it." Or worse. "Honey, Mason's running into a bit of trouble with his new app project. His investor just pulled out. Can you help him cover office rent for another month?" I worked 2 jobs, ate instant noodles, and drove a car with no A/C, and yet they still treated me like a personal ATM. I once said, "Mom, I don't have extra money." Her voice softened like it was a compliment. "But you always figure things out, Sarah. You're so capable." They used my resilience as a reason not to care whether I was exhausted, okay, or simply needed someone to check in. One time, I got the flu so bad I couldn't stand. I called in sick from deliveries and curled up on the floor of my tiny room, shaking and crying. I called my mom, just wanting to hear a familiar voice. She answered, told me to keep warm and drink fluids, then added, "By the way, is your credit card still working? Mason needs to order new recording equipment." I don't even remember how I hung up. I just know I took out the SIM card, shoved it into a drawer, and didn't turn my phone back on for 3 days. I thought maybe it was just Mom. But then Dad called. "She's working like crazy," he said, meaning me. "If you care about family, you should contribute. Mason is your blood." Blood? I was the one who just lost my night shift from muscle fatigue and dizziness. I was the one debating whether to sell my laptop to cover this month's electric bill. I was the one eating a cold sandwich in my car because I couldn't afford a salad. But I should share with someone who had never earned a dime without reaching into someone else's wallet? The breaking point came last month. I came home at 2 in the morning, soaked from the rain. A message popped up. "Mom needs to talk, urgent." I called back. Her voice trembled like I'd abandoned someone on their deathbed. "Sarah, if you don't help, Mason will lose this deal." "Just 3,000, honey. We'll pay it back soon." I wasn't angry, I wasn't surprised. I just felt empty. I said slowly, "I don't have 3,000. I don't even have 300. Silence. Then her voice, barely audible. "You're not the same sister anymore." That was the moment I understood. To them, I only mattered if I could be drained. If I could still help. I thought back to all the times I called home, excited to share that a client praised my logo, that a professor said I had potential, that a small magazine agreed to publish my illustration. Every time I was met with, "That's nice. Anyway, guess what Mason's up to?" No one asked if I was happy. No one cared whether I still had the strength to smile. But every time Mason rebranded, failed, and started over, they called it entrepreneurship. Last month, I showed up to a family dinner for the first time in 3 months. As I walked in, Dad grinned. "Sweetheart, heard you landed a new client?" I nodded. He clapped my shoulder like a colleague. "Great. But wait till you hear this. Mason was just invited to speak on a finance podcast." Applause. Cheers. I just sat there chewing a cold piece of broccoli saying nothing. And I swore that would be the last time I let myself be diminished at my own family's dinner table. That night the rain never let up. Streetlights blurred behind the wet windshield, and the Corolla's wipers screeched with every sweep. I delivered 4 large pizzas to a mansion in River Heights. The kind of neighborhood with more security cameras than trees. The GPS brought me to a gated entrance lined with ivy-covered fences glowing under soft golden lights. I rang the intercom. "Delivery from Rico's." A man's voice buzzed through. "Gates open, just head in." As I stepped out with a sagging pizza box under a torn umbrella, EDM music thudded from inside the house, mixed with loud, drunken laughter. This wasn't a regular birthday party. Flashing lights from the foyer painted my damp coat in strange colors as I rang the doorbell again. A sleek-hipped guy, shirt unbuttoned down to his chest, opened the door and gave me a look like I'd just landed from another planet. "Pizza's here," he shouted, then turned to me. "How much?" $82.38. He shoved a $100 bill into my hand without another word and disappeared inside. I fumbled for change when a voice called from behind. "Sarah? Sarah Campbell?" I turned cautiously. A man in his 50s, no tie, gray blazer damp at the shoulders, stood under the dry overhang of the house across the street. His eyes flickered with surprise, then something like concern. "You are, I'm Thomas. Thomas Reed. Your mom's brother." That name hit like a cold gust through memory. Memory Slough. Reed, the one who gave me Winsor Newton watercolors for my 10th birthday. the one who vanished from family conversations after an argument no one explained. My mother never said his name again. I froze, my mind scrambling to match what I saw with what I remembered. He looked nothing like the man they'd painted as a reckless investor or financial failure. He was composed, gray at the temples, confident. "You're delivering pizzas?" he asked, clearly stunned. I clutched the tip pouch, unsure how to answer without shame. "It's my second job. Sarah." His voice softened. "I didn't expect to see you like this. Do you have a minute? There's a 24-hour cafe just down the block." I glanced at my car. Soaked, front seat littered with pizza boxes and crumpled napkins. My body was cold, my pride colder. But something in his eyes, neither pity nor judgment, made me nod. At Beacon's Light Cafe, I sat across from the only relative my family had erased. Hot coffee, a dry coat, a clean napkin. I felt like I'd escaped a storm. "Why did you get cut off from the family?" I asked. He stared out the window for a while, then, "It started when your dad and I launched a tech startup. The idea had promise, but when things got tricky financially, he wanted to cut corners, work with shady partners. I refused. Ended up buying him out. The project succeeded, but he never forgave me. I never knew." "No one told you?" I figured. He leaned forward. "But that's not why I wanted to talk. I want to know, what do you need, and why are you working yourself sick for people who don't see you?" So I told him. No drama, no polish. I spoke of Mason, of the midnight calls, the forgotten birthday, the bus instead of a car, the vanished college fund, the way strong became an excuse to leave me alone. He didn't interrupt, just nodded now and then. When I finished, he slid a business card across the table. "I don't do charity, but my company, Aerotech, is always looking for designers with visual intuition. I can arrange a meeting with our design lead. No promises. Just a real shot to show what you've got." I stared at the card. A company I remembered from a sustainable tech seminar. A real company. Not the fantasy of a coddled younger brother with a dream and no plan. "I don't want anything just because I'm your niece," I said quietly. "And you won't," he replied. "You'll be treated like anyone else. But this time, no one's going to trash your application just because you don't fit their perfect mold." That night, walking back to my car, I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, someone listened to me. Not because I was strong, but because I was worth hearing. 3 days later, I stepped into the lobby of Aerotech, an 8-story glass building with slate-colored panels, located in the northern part of the city. I wore the only white shirt I had that was still crisp, my hair tied neatly, and carried a self-printed portfolio in a slightly stretched plastic folder. My palms were drenched in sweat, but my voice stayed steady as I spoke to the receptionist. "I have an appointment with Grace Monroe for the design internship." The young woman behind the front desk nodded, made a quick call, then smiled. "Ms. Monroe will be down shortly, please have a seat." I sat on a leather chair, my leg bouncing non-stop. My Uncle Tomas's words kept echoing in my mind. "Grace has a sharp eye for talent. Don't mention my name. Let your portfolio speak first." 5 minutes later, a woman with warm brown skin, cropped hair, a black blazer and thick-rimmed glasses walked up. Her gaze was swift, clear, and without a hint of favoritism. "Sarah Campbell?" I nodded and stood up. "I'm Grace. Follow me." The meeting wasn't a formal interview. Grace called it a preliminary skills assessment. We sat in a small meeting room with a glass board, sketch pads, and 2 cups of coffee. She flipped through each page of my portfolio, lingering longer on a brand identity I had designed for a small bakery, a project I'd done for $80. "Good color harmony. Fonts are well chosen. But your layout lacks consistency. Did you revise after client feedback?" I only did one round. The client didn't give any feedback, so I figured they were fine with it. No feedback doesn't mean it's fine, Grace replied bluntly. I'm not looking for someone perfect on day one. I'm looking for someone who can learn. That line made me exhale a little. At least, I still had a chance. At the end of the assessment, she stood up and said simply, "You start next week. It's a 3-month internship. There's a stipend, but it's modest. We evaluate based on skill, not connections. Deal?" "As long as it's a fair evaluation, I'll accept whatever outcome," I responded. The following week, I started my first day at Aerotech, just like every other intern. Seated at a side desk, handed an old computer, and given a checklist of weekly tasks. The only person who knew I was Thomas's niece was me, and I planned to keep it that way for as long as possible. The beginning was rough. The design team was young, sharp, and tossed around industry jargon like it was everyday speech. I didn't dare speak up during brainstorming sessions. But I took notes on everything, researched after hours, and stayed late to practice. I didn't want to be the outsider forever. One Wednesday evening, after everyone else had gone home, I was still at my desk redrawing a layout for an internal project, the company's annual event poster. I hadn't been assigned the work, but I quietly created an alternate version of the design Grace had shown that morning. When she came back to retrieve some forgotten documents and saw my screen, she stood silently for a while, then asked, "Have you sent that to the team lead?" I shook my head. I was just trying to learn how they build layouts. She nodded, slipped the papers into her bag, and walked away. No praise, no criticism. But the next morning, my design was printed and pinned on the internal board with the caption, "Reference concept for design team." My name was in the lower corner. No one said anything. But I noticed a few glances change in the meeting room that day. By the end of the first month, I was assigned the lead design for an internal newsletter. In the second month, I was invited to present directly to a client, a local coffee shop chain looking to rebrand. Grace sat beside me and didn't step in as I pitched. After the meeting, she said only one thing. "Your voice shook." But the idea didn't. In the final week of the internship, I received an email from HR with the subject, "Interview invitation for junior designer position." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then, almost instinctively, I called Uncle Thomas. "I got an interview for a full-time role," I said. "And I didn't use your name." His voice was low and steady. "Because you didn't need to. What I saw in you that night. Stubborn, exhausted, but still standing. That's why I knew you'd make it. Keep going. No one is giving you anything. You're taking it." I hung up, my eyes stinging. Not because I was emotional, but because for the first time I believed it was true. I was no longer the shadow behind someone else's success. I was standing, on my own 2 feet. I walked into my new office on a cloudless Monday morning. 6th floor, southeast corner, where sunlight poured in like the sun itself was congratulating me. A small plaque outside the door bore my name, Sarah Campbell, Junior Designer. Just a basic title, nothing flashy. But to me, it marked the first milestone that truly belonged to me. My 3-month internship had ended with a short but intense interview with the internal panel. I walked out with sweaty palms, but the subtle nod from Grace was enough to tell me I was chosen not because of family connections. From that moment, I started living a completely different life. Not because things suddenly became easier, but because I no longer had to fight alone. My salary didn't spark envy, but it was enough to move out of that crumbling rental and into a tiny studio near Lakewood Park. The apartment had large windows overlooking maple trees, real hardwood floors, and a small kitchen where I could cook a decent meal after work. I bought a used sofa from Craigslist, a few cacti for the sunlit corner, and for the first time ever, my space felt like a true reflection of me. My old 2006 Corolla still rattled when turning left, but now I could afford regular maintenance. I upgraded my main credit card to one that didn't force me to scrape by, and my savings account, modest though it was, finally existed without being drained every month. But the biggest change was how I walked each morning. No more lowering my head, no more shame seeing coworkers step out of luxury cars. I wore dark jeans, a simple blouse, my badge proudly displayed, and smiled at the receptionist like I truly belonged here. Grace, as usual, didn't say much, but after I completed a product launch campaign designed for a client in Chicago, she sent a simple email. Good. Clear visual direction. Consider Sarah for secondary lead in next project. A week later, I was assigned as lead designer for the rebranding of a cultural bookstore chain, a small client with strong potential. I said nothing to Uncle Thomas. I wanted him to hear it from others, the way any employee would when praised for actual merit. Every weekend I still stopped by Brewhaven, the cafe where I started. Zoe was still there, now a shift manager. Her hair a smoky purple, and her tone as sharp as ever. "Looks like you're finally getting recognized," she teased. "No more running around with cappuccinos and pizza deliveries." I laughed, sipping my hot macchiato. Still the girl who wiped the bar last year. Just now I can choose not to take night shifts. We sat in silence for a while. Just the hum of the coffee grinder and sunlight slanting across the worn wooden table. I'd begun reading again, a habit I'd loved as a child but abandoned in survival mode. The first book I picked up was The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand, a worn copy from the library, about the resilience of the underestimated. I read each page slowly, as if reclaiming pieces of my forgotten self. Sometimes, I still got texts from Mom, brief and indifferent as ever. "Mason's starting a new project. Your dad hopes you'll come for dinner Sunday." No mention of my work, health or current life. But now, it no longer stung. I understood, people can only give what they have. And sometimes, what they lack most is the ability to love fairly. Uncle Thomas kept his word. No interference, no favors. But one late afternoon as I packed to leave, he stopped by my desk and laid down a printed Forbes article. Aero Tech, among top 10 most inspiring tech companies of the year. "Your design team contributed to the new branding campaign," he said, without embellishment. "Well done." I smiled, folded the article, and tucked it into my bag. I knew, it wasn't just about one successful campaign. It was the reward for every invisible day. Those nights learning design tools alone. The job rejections for lacking a degree. The rainy pizza runs while dreaming of a real drafting table. That dream now sat in front of me, a 27-inch monitor, a brand new stylus, and a folder labeled, Summer 2024 Campaign, Lead Design, Sarah Campbell. I looked at it like I was looking at myself, not the Sarah who was once overlooked, but the Sarah of today. A woman no longer living off pity, but thriving on skill and relentless perseverance. And I thought, if someone had told me years ago that I'd make it here, I'd have laughed. But now I know. Every scrape, every cramp nap behind the coffee counter, every rejection, was a step that led me to this very moment. A late September Saturday afternoon, I was fine-tuning the color palette for the Green Tech Reboot campaign when my phone rang. Mason's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated for a few seconds before picking up. "Hey, are you free tonight?" His voice wasn't its usual casual tone. There was something urgent, even panicked. "What's going on?" "Mom and Dad, they need you to come, it's serious." I arrived at the old house just before 7 p.m. The front looked different. The lawn was overgrown, weeds tangled in the flower bed by the porch, the right window curtain sagging to one side. Mom opened the door. She looked worn, her hair noticeably grayer, though she wasn't even 60. Dad sat in the living room, no longer in his crisp dress shirt like usual, just an old sweater with a hole in the left shoulder. No one offered me a drink. No smell of Sunday night roasts or apple pie. Just silence. And the sterile yellow light of a bare bulb. Then my father spoke. "The house is going into foreclosure." The words dropped like a stone. I sat up straight. What did you just say? Mason stood near the door, hands clenched. Mom lowered her head. Dad stared ahead, unblinking. We refinanced the house 2 years ago. To invest in Mason's e-learning platform. I turned to Mason. The one you told me already had seed funding? It did, he stammered. But they pulled out when the market dipped. And Mom and Dad used their retirement savings to keep it afloat? Mom nodded, eyes red. We thought it was the right call. Mason needed a chance. And I didn't? That question silenced them all. I stood, pacing the room. No more family photos. Just a few bills, strewn across the coffee table. On top was a notice from the bank. Past due payment. Total owed, $312,000. Sarah, Mason said quietly. I didn't realize it was this bad. Didn't realize or didn't want to. And Mom, Dad, did either of you ever think to stop, or was it always just assumed that Sarah would be fine? Mom burst into tears. But I felt nothing. Just hollow. Dad sat quiet for a long moment, then said, You don't have to help if you don't want to. But family is family. We made mistakes. But we're still blood. I looked him straight in the eye. All I ever asked for was a shot. Just once. To be chosen. Instead, my college fund was drained for a startup. Even investors passed on. Mom raised her head, lips trembling. Sarah, there's something I never told you. I narrowed my eyes. What? 10 years ago, when we decided to take your college fund for Mason's first startup, your Uncle Thomas came here. He offered to replace the entire amount. No strings attached. He said it was an investment in you. I couldn't breathe. But your father said no, she went on. Called it charity. Said Thomas only wanted to prove he was better, and he banned him from contacting you after that. I turned to Dad. He said nothing. Didn't even deny it. You kept that from me for 10 years? We thought you'd find your way, Mom whispered. I took a step back. Then another. Everything in this house, from the lighting to the furniture to the people, suddenly felt foreign. No longer a home, just a shell built on decades of selfish choices disguised as family. Sarah, my father called. I said one thing, in a voice so calm it chilled even me. For the first time in my life, I'm living a life I built myself. And no one in this house has the right to pull me backward. Then I walked out the door. That night the rain fell in soft drizzles. But I didn't need an umbrella. I didn't need shelter anymore. Because now I knew, the only thing I ever needed to protect was myself. 2 weeks after I walked out of the house on Willow Street, I received an email from Mom titled simply, Can we talk? I read it 3 times before replying, short and direct. Saturday, 3 p.m., Oak Leaf Cafe, Midtown. They arrived on time, all 3 of them. Dad, Mom, Mason, sat across from me at the windowside table. No one spoke at first. There was no anger, no defensiveness. Just a silence that, for once, felt like listening. I began, I'll help, but this time, on my terms. Mom looked up, hopeful. This isn't about giving you money to throw into another failure. Here's what I require. 1. Mason needs to get a real job. A paying job with responsibilities. No more vague projects. 2. You both must attend weekly family therapy for at least 3 months. 3. My financial support will be a formal loan with a written agreement and structured repayment plan. No verbal promises, no exceptions. If any part is violated, I'll pull out entirely. No one objected, but no one agreed right away either. It was Mason who finally spoke. I don't know if I can do it. I met his eyes. It's not about can. It's about, have you ever truly tried? Dad remained tense but didn't interrupt like he once would have. Mom gave a small nod. I'll schedule the first therapy session for next week, I said. And Mason, you have 3 days to apply to at least 5 jobs. I want screenshots each time. As for Mom and Dad, I'll pay for an initial financial advisor meeting to review the mortgage paperwork. But I'm not covering late fees, credit card debt, or personal penalties. I stood up. This isn't about pity anymore. It's about accountability. If you're ready, then so am I. That evening, Mason texted. I applied to Target, Staples, and Pet Pals near the house. Not thinking about startups anymore. Just thinking about that first paycheck. 3 months passed. The first therapy sessions were rough. Dad didn't speak a word during the first. Mom cried by the 10-minute mark. Mason sat quietly, staring at the floor. But over time, something shifted. The conversations, once ruled by defensiveness and outbursts, began to include real pauses, real thought. In week 5, Dad said, I never felt good enough to be chosen. My father idolized Thomas. Maybe that's why I pushed Mason to win. But I didn't see that Sarah had been winning in silence. It was the first time he said my name, fully, without bitterness. Mason had started a part-time shift at Staples downtown. He sent me a photo of his badge. I look goofy, but hey, I've got my own uniform. I laughed. The first genuine laugh in this relationship in almost a decade. As for me, I kept building at Aerotech. Our spring campaign had just exceeded sales projections. Grace called me in and said, Next month I'll be out. You'll be leading the design team and reporting directly to the board. It's your chance to see what the front line feels like. I nodded. No panic, no doubt. I'd spent long enough in the back row to know how to run the whole stage. One Sunday afternoon, I returned to my parents' house. Now, with a patched-up roof, trimmed lawn, and a property underpayment plan sign out front. I brought a small pot of lavender and set it on the kitchen window. Mom smiled, the first smile without apology. This house needs a bit more color, I said. She nodded. And you? You brought it back. A year later, Aerotech launched Second Start, a mentorship program for young adults who missed out on college due to family circumstances. I volunteered to host its first session. At the opening, I shared my story, not dramatically, just the steps. A rainy pizza delivery, my first contract with Aerotech. I ended with, my family once thought I was strong enough to never need anything. But maybe the strongest ones are those who went the longest without fairness, and still moved forward. The audience was silent, then applause. Among them stood Mason, next to our parents. They didn't clap the loudest, but they stood the closest, since I was 16. I haven't forgiven everything. But I've allowed change to begin, and in doing so, I've freed myself. Not just from memory, but from the role of the one who carries everyone. I never asked to play. Now, I choose my role. And I choose to be the one who lights the way. Not because I've known the dark, but because I learned how to walk out of it. Sarah's story is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about enduring quietly. It's about setting boundaries and demanding fairness for yourself. When favoritism and long-standing hurt are replaced by clear conditions and real dialogue, even a fractured family system can begin to heal. In real life, if you've ever been labeled as the strong one who doesn't need support, remember, you deserve to be heard, to be seen, and you have every right to ask for it, unapologetically. What do you think of Sarah's choice? Was she too harsh, or was she simply reclaiming what she truly deserved? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful stories about family and life.